The US national debt is getting higher by each passing minute, with the US owing a total of $33 trillion plus, which is about $99,000 plus for every citizen by the time of recording. Welcome to Piquant. Please like our channel, subscribe for more videos. Also, comment your suggestion below on how the United States can escape this growing disaster. Now, let me explain. What is the national debt? The national debt is the total amount of outstanding borrowing by the US federal government accumulated over the nation's history. The US Treasury uses the terms national debt, federal debt, and public debt interchangeably. The national debt is composed of distinct types of debt similar to an individual whose debt may consist of a mortgage, car loan, and credit cards. The different types of debt include non-marketable or marketable securities, and whether it is debt held by the public or debt held by the government itself, known as intragovernmental. The US has carried debt since its inception. Debts incurred during the American Revolutionary War amounted to $75 million, primarily borrowed from domestic investors and the French government for war materials. The national debt enables the federal government to pay for important programs and services for the American public. The national debt is the amount of money the federal government has borrowed to cover the outstanding balance of expenses incurred over time in a given fiscal year when spending, example, money for roadways, exceeds revenue, example, money from federal income tax, a budget deficit results. To pay for this deficit, the federal government borrows money by selling marketable securities such as treasury bonds, bills, notes, floating rate notes, and treasury inflation-protected securities, TIPS. The national debt is the accumulation of this borrowing along with associated interest owed to the investors who purchased these securities. As the federal government experiences recurring deficits, which is common, the national debt grows. Simply put, the national debt is similar to a person using a credit card for purchases and not paying off the full balance each month. The cost of purchases exceeding the amount paid off represents a deficit, while accumulated deficits over time represents a person's overall debt. The federal government needs to borrow money to pay its bills when its ongoing spending activities and investments cannot be funded by federal revenues alone. Decreases in federal revenue are largely due to either a decrease in tax rates or individuals or corporations making less money. The national debt enables the federal government to pay for important programs and services, even if it does not have funds immediately available, often due to a decrease in revenue. Decreases in federal revenue, coupled with increased government spending, further increases the deficit. Consistent with the purpose of the federal government established by the US Constitution, money is spent on programs and services to ensure the well-being of US residents. The Constitution's preamble states that the purpose of the federal government is to establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Uninterrupted funding of programs and services is critical to residents' health, welfare, and security. The US has carried debt since its inception. Debts incurred during the American Revolutionary War amounted to over $75 million by January 1, 1791, over the next 45 years. The debt continued to grow until 1835, when it notably shrank due to the sale of federally owned lands and cuts to the federal budget. Shortly thereafter, an economic depression caused the debt to again grow into the millions. The debt grew over 4,000 through the course of the American Civil War, increasing from $65 million in 1862 to $1 billion in 1863 and around $2.07 billion shortly after the conclusion of the war in 1865. The debt grew steadily into the 20th century and was roughly $22 after the country financed its involvement in World War I. Notable recent events triggering large spikes in the debt include the Afghanistan and Iraq wars, the 2008 Great Recession, and the COVID-19 pandemic. From FY 2019 to FY 2021, spending increased by about 50%, largely due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Tax cuts, stimulus programs, increased government spending, and decreased tax revenue caused by widespread unemployment generally account for sharp rises in the national debt. Comparing a country's debt to its gross domestic product reveals the country's ability to pay down its debt. This ratio is considered a better indicator of a country's fiscal situation than just the national debt number because it shows the burden of debt relative to the country's total economic output, and therefore its ability to repay it. The US debt to GDP ratio surpassed 100 in 2013, when both debt and GDP were approximately 16.7 trillion. Over the past 100 years, the US federal debt has increased from $408 in 1922 to $30.93 in 2022. There are two major categories for federal debt: debt held by the public and intragovernmental holdings. The debt held by the public has increased by 118 since 2013. Intragovernmental holdings increased by 44 since 2013. The federal government is charged interest for the use of lenders' money in the same way that lenders charge an individual interest for a car loan or mortgage. How much the government pays in interest depends on the total national debt and the various securities' interest rates. As of August 2023, it cost $808 billion to maintain the debt, which is 15% of the total federal spending. The national debt has increased every year over the past 10 years. Interest expenses during this period have remained fairly stable due to low interest rates and an investor's judgment that the US government has a very low risk of default. However, recent increases in interest rates and inflation are now resulting in an increase in interest expense. When interest rates remain low over time, interest expense on the debt paid by the federal government will remain stable even as the federal debt increases. As interest rates increase, the cost of maintaining the national debt also increases. The debt ceiling. The debt ceiling, or debt limit, is a restriction imposed by Congress on the amount of outstanding national debt that the federal government can have. The debt ceiling is the amount that the Treasury can borrow to pay the bills that have become due and pay for future investments. Once the debt ceiling is reached, the federal government cannot increase the amount of outstanding debt, losing the ability to pay bills and fund programs and services. However, the Treasury can use extraordinary measures authorized by Congress to temporarily suspend certain intragovernmental debt, allowing it to borrow to fund programs or services for a limited amount of time after it has reached the ceiling. Since the United States has never defaulted on its obligations, the scope of the negative repercussions related to a default are unknown but would likely have catastrophic repercussions in the United States and in markets across the globe. Thank you for watching. Subscribe, like and comment below. See you in the next video.